Hey everybody, I'm Todd and this is Sweet Tea Guitars. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel and welcome to the Great Guitar Build Off 2022. Alright you guys, when we left off last time, I had glued up a bunch of blanks. We had talked about this fretboard a little bit. You know I'm doing a tapered fretboard with the glue up accent piece down the middle. This is ebony and purple heart separated by some anagray veneer. And I really like this purple heart and this ebony together. I think that looks really good. I want to get this fretboard flat. I've already worked a little bit on the other side of this thing. I've ran it across the jointer a few times and got the back side flattened up. I don't want to run the top of this across the jointer because considering it's a figured piece of purple heart, regardless of which way I feed it across the jointer, it'll get a little tear out on it. So what I've opted to do is I cleaned this up with the number 4 hand plane to start with and just knocked all the glue off of it and everything. What I'm going to do now is just take a scraper and we're just going to scrape this fretboard flat. I'm a little bit high on these outside ends, so I want to get some of that gone. What I'm really trying to do, a piece of that anagray veneer had broken off, you know, that way. I'm trying to get down to where I can actually see a nice clean white line all down the fretboard. And I've tried a bunch of different ways of doing this. I mean, the hand plane's good, but I still get a little bit of tear out even using the hand plane. I like using the scraper about as good as I do anything. One thing I've noticed is this is a 60 thousandths scraper. This is an 80 thousandths scraper. They're both Crown Sheffield tools. The 80 thousandths works better for this kind of thing because it doesn't bend quite as much. Let's check it with our straight edge. You know, I don't want to get too far off. Now, I got a light behind here. I'm not worried about getting this totally flat because we still got to radius this thing, and I can really start to concentrate on getting it flat once I start getting it with the radius block. Let's take our flatboard sander. You guys know how much I love this thing. Let's just sand on this thing for a minute. That feels really, really good. I think we're probably to the point now to where we can start laying this thing out. I got my 22 fret Maximum Guitar Works fretboard template right here. Now I know this is the side that I want up because this side's got a notch shadow in it right here. Plus I spent a lot longer on this side sanding, but as you can see, this side's really nice and clean. That's just a beautiful look, I think. We put some oil on this thing and it's going to come to life. The purple heart has died back a little bit. What's going to happen is I'll expose this thing to some sunlight before we actually glue this up to the neck, and that purple, it will turn bright purple again. And then we'll do that after we get the sanding and everything done before we oil it. Because the oil is going to have UV inhibitors in it most of the time, and we want the UV to be able to turn this back purple again. So my thoughts were to do it like that, have the nut end on this end and the taper going up like that. If you'll look at this grain on this ebony, the grain takes a dive that way a little. I think that'll look better on the heel side. So we're going to go that way. And all we want to do is figure out where we want to place this fretboard. So I'll show you guys what I'm thinking. You know, I want it to still have a little ebony on the outside edge of that purple heart that way. And up here on this side, I want it to have a little bit of ebony left on top there. So what we want to do is get this thing laid out like we want it. Mark out a center line. All I need to do really is take our pencil and I'll just mark the center line. go ahead and draw out the fretboard around this thing and see what it looks like. If I need to, I'll adjust it. So you see what I mean? I left a little bit of the ebony on the corner of each end instead of it fading off and creating a possible irregular shape from one end to the other. I would rather do it this way. So that's what I think we're going to do. Just to give a little bit more fretboard width down on the heel end, I may expand it to 57.5, which would ultimately be about 1 millimeter over, 0.5 millimeter on each side. It'll be a minimal difference in the whole scope of things, but when it comes down the string spacing down here on this end, I think it'll give you more room to play. Now it's going to follow a steeper taper because I will still observe a 43 millimeter nut width down here. So the taper is going to be a little bit steeper, but it's so minimal that you won't even hardly be able to tell it. All I'm doing right now is figuring out my layout for how I'm going to have that stripe down the middle of my fretboard. What I'm probably going to do, I'll observe that center line that we've got drawn on there. That's what I wanted out of this whole exercise, is a center line. I'll erase this fretboard part of this drawing here. We'll draw out some things on this fretboard. We need to know where our 22nd fret's going to fall though. What we'll do is figure out how much overhang we want past our 22nd fret. But I want a heel width at the 22nd fret of 57.5 millimeters with a nut width of 43 millimeters. So that's what we're shooting for, just so you guys know. So this is a Maximum Guitar Works fret slotting template. Let's figure out the center measurement wise in millimeters between our nut line and our 22nd fret. That is my midpoint. So I want to move this up and down, and I want the center of my fretboard to intersect that Purple Heart line at that mark. And mark our 22nd fret. And let's go down here and mark our nut line. There's our nut line. There's our 22nd fret. I'm going to notate that up here, nut. What we want to do now is mark out 43 millimeters, 21.5. And down on this end, I said I wanted a 57.5. So what is that? 28.75 millimeters. And that worked out great. That looks like we've got pretty even spacing. We're about the same distance on the corner down here on the 43 millimeter nut width side as we are on this side at the end or at the 22nd fret. You don't want the strings to look like they're following a different angle than the taper on the side of the neck. You want that to be consistent down the length of the fretboard. What we're looking to do by increasing the width on the heel end of the fretboard is to make it more accessible and give you more playable room when you're doing bends and things like that. That is the advantage to having an expanded heel width on your fretboard without worrying about changing your nut width. Playability has to be first. You guys have heard me say that before. It's all about how well the instrument plays. If you can put yourself in kind of both mindsets at the same time, it's really helpful to be a player who builds guitars. Anyway, I'm pretty happy with how this has ended up so far. We're not going to cut this fretboard out until after I've got the neck blank cut out and routed, actually. Because what we'll do, once I get the neck blank routed, I will lay out these same dimensions on our neck blank, and then we'll cut it out on the bandsaw, run it across the router table, double check our measurements to make sure they're right, and tweak those on the neck. Then we'll slot this fretboard, drill some holes down through the slots to give us some alignment pins. We'll line this up on our center line and on our nut line, make sure everything's like it needs to be. Then we will use the side of the neck blank as the template to cut the fretboard out. If I decide to go with binding, then I'm going to need to leave the fretboard unradiused, because if we radius it, it's going to want to rock back and forth. You'll never get a straight binding channel cut that way. I could flat sand this thing, mark it up with a pencil, make sure it's absolutely flat, then go and cut our binding channel. When I left off last night, I was working on the fretboard. We need to lay this neck out. I really appreciate you guys stopping by the channel, by the way, and thank you so much for your overwhelming response during the giveaway build. You guys have just made my life so great. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys. All 4 sides of this neck blank have been across the jointer, so it's nice and flat. I've checked it with the straight edge. This is going to be the fretboard side of my neck. I like the way the grain looks on the back of this thing a little better. I have pretty much decided that I am going to put the skinny side of the taper on the headstock end. The thick side of the taper will be the heel. Let's draw us a line. We'll call this a cutoff line. So I can't go any further than this. I want to keep as much length on this neck blank as possible. I've measured the new headstock design that I'm using on the figure 8 build. We're going to somewhat duplicate that headstock on this guitar. I may change it slightly, but one of these 2 headstocks, once all is said and done, will end up being the standard 3x3 headstock that I use for all the guitars here in the shop, and I will make a template from one of these necks, and we'll have a template to use at that point. So I already know that my headstock on the figure 8 build is at 174, but we're going to mark this at 175, and that has pretty much determined where our nut line is going to be. So there is our nut line. Let's take this 25-inch fretboard template, 25.5 inch, I'm sorry, and just lay it up here and see what kind of room that's going to give us. Since this will not be a Fender style neck, I don't need that residual fretboard that's behind the nut. We will actually cut the fretboard off right there where the nut starts, and I will sandwich the nut in between the headstock plate and the fretboard. This neck will need to have a break angle, either in the body or the neck, or a combination of both, and I have not decided completely how I'm going to do that yet. It's probably going to be cut into the body. That will allow me to leave the back of the neck flat, and I'll let the break angle happen on the body route. Let's figure out a center line on this thing. And again, you guys, when you're using a multi-laminate neck and you've got a center lamination, I like to use that veneer to find the center instead of the 2 outside edges of the neck, because I may be a couple of millimeters wider on one side than I am the other. That will allow us to achieve a perfect center line. And it looks like I am right on the outside of the 4mm line on both sides. So I'll take my 0.5mm pencil, and I want to make a small mark right there in the center. All right, I'm at 8mm on the inside of the veneer on both sides. And let's just draw in our center line. And I don't want to bear down too hard, because if I look and it's visually off a little, I'll erase it and we'll redraw it, because this is the master. This center line right here will determine every other center line and basically every other mark on the guitar. So you want it as perfect as you can get it. And that looks pretty dang good. So let's take our square and make a mark. That gives me that much room at the end of this neck blank to allow for that tenon idea that I have. All right, what we need to do is draw out our neck at this point. Instead of depending on one side of the neck to be completely perfectly square, we will use the center line to get a perpendicular line drawn where our nut is supposed to be. We'll mark it at 29 because I'd rather be a little bit over than a little under. And then I can accommodate for that when we go to set our flat wood pieces down that we plan on using as a router bearing guide. There we go. So now what this is going to do is set our taper. Now what we need to do is draw out this headstock shape. And anything we're not completely happy with, we can fix on the spindle sander. Forgot I had these French curves. I want to talk a little bit about this headstock design that I've come up with. I have altered it slightly. I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this. You'll be able to see it better once I get this headstock cut out on the bandsaw. But ultimately what I've done is change the angle at which these ride once the strings leave the nut. I want the string pull as straight as I can get it. But if the two top tuners end up splaying the strings slightly, I'm not concerned about that. As a matter of fact, I don't mind if they have a slight splay all the way up the headstock. I just don't want it too great. You know what I mean? And I've drawn the angles that I've made the sides of this headstock. I've taken that into consideration with a measurement of about 14 to 15 millimeters from the edge of the headstock to the center of the tuner hole. What we want to do now that I've got this headstock design somewhat roughed in, now we'll finesse this on the spindle sander once we get to that point, but I want to get this neck drawn out and cut out, and then I'm probably going to end this video there. I think that'll be plenty enough information, and that'll get my neck to a point where it's ready for me to start attaching some strips of wood that I can use as a router bit bearing guide, and get this neck routed so we can start thinking about getting the fretboard mounted to it. And that'll be coming up in the next episode. But for now, let's get this neck drawn out. So I'm going to pan down, and this will be somewhat like the figure 8 build that I'm doing at the same time here. These guitars are going to have some similarities, especially in the neck construction. What I want to do first of all is copy this nut line around all 4 sides of the neck. So let's get that done first. Let's do the same thing down here. I've got the 22nd and the 24th fret drawn in here just in case I decide to do something funky on the end of the fretboard that will allow me to have 24 frets on the bottom 2 or 3 strings. We'll figure that out once we get there, so I am going to treat this for now like it's going to be a 24 fret neck. So let's draw in the 24th. We'll go ahead and draw in the 22nd as well. Okay, now what we want to do, I already know based on the figure 8 build that if I drop this down 21.5 millimeters at the top of my headstock line, that's going to give me roughly a 7-degree back angle on the headstock. I'm going to mark this at the no-go line, you know, the end of our neck blank. I'm going to mark this at 21 millimeters. That'll be slightly beyond where my headstock ends. And then we will intersect our nut line with that line. All right, that gives me an absolute back angle on the headstock. So what we want to do is measure 15 millimeters below that line at the back edge. And I'm actually going about 15.5 because I want a finished thickness of about 14 millimeters here. All right, that gives me plenty of room below the headstock to still be able to accommodate the back angle on the headstock, as you guys can see right there, hopefully. I've got about 10 millimeters below my headstock. Let's flip this over and do the same thing to the other side. So there's our headstock basically. So what we want to do now is kind of sketch in a volute. So we want to make our neck thickness down the length of this neck at about 20. We'll leave it at 21 as well. All right, let's get our long ruler and draw this in. Okay. I really only want to put the marks on the side of this neck that I need at this point. I think a volute is really a cool look to a back of a neck, and it absolutely adds stability, and it gives you more wood under the nut, which in my opinion gives you a little bit better sustain and better tonal transfer from the guitar as a whole. Now we need to get our fret slotting template. So we need to line this up on our nut and figure out where we want the body to join the neck at. Somewhere around the 17th fret is generally the accepted area. Even if we alter that slightly, it won't be much. All right, there we go. So that's 17, and we'll notate that. When we go to cut this out on the bandsaw, we don't want to cut a flat right here. We want to transition down into the full thickness of the heel. And I want to utilize the full thickness of this neck blank at this point, or as much as I can. That should be fine. And we're going to flatten all this up once we get the bandsaw done anyway. So now we're to the point that we need to pre-drill our tuner holes. So let's mark those with our awl. Maybe now you guys will be able to see the headstock design a little bit easier. Let's drill these in. And I'm not even going all the way through this blank. I just want it deep enough so when I cut this neck out, those holes will be revealed. There's our tuner holes pre-drilled, ready to roll. We're to the point now, you guys, to where, you know, there's not much left to do for us but to just move this thing to the bandsaw. I'm going to crank the vacuum cleaner up. Let's get this neck blank cut out. In the next video, we're going to work some more on this neck. Hopefully we will get the fretboard attached, get it slotted, get a initial radius cut on our fretboard once we make the decision on whether or not we're going to use binding on this fretboard. I've got some curly maple binding over there, but I don't want to get the fretboard to a point till it's starting to look overly busy. I like to keep things simple, at least in appearance. And I don't know how the binding's going to look on this. It may go over the top when it comes to look, considering I've got that strip run down the middle, and the fact that I'm adding some pretty decorative fret markers that you guys will see here shortly when we go to get the radius and all that stuff done on the fretboard. We'll make that decision in the next video. But we're going to get this neck ready to use as a template that I can clamp down on top of a body. I'm not going to decide the preliminary body shape until after I get the neck pocket routed into the body. We're concentrating on the Great Guitar Build Off 2022 and what my build's going to wind up being for that. I'm doing this guitar on the fly, which is completely different than what I said I was going to do in the beginning. And I apologize for that. I had originally intended to draw this whole guitar out. But now that I've seen what everybody else is doing, it's let me know that I need to keep not only myself, but everyone else who is subscribed to my channel or anyone who may see my videos. I want you guys to be surprised just like I am when I make a decision to do something to this guitar. I love building that way already. I like making it up as I go and then just dealing with it. I think as long as you're methodical in the execution of the processes that it takes to build a guitar, building on the fly can be an absolute great learning experience. You know, once you get your neck and your body blank glued up, from then on, it's like there's no limit. Your imagination is your only limit. So I like letting that lead me through a build, and knowing that I'm not using a template on this guitar and that I'm going to build it freestyle in a sense, that excites me and I like it. I hope you guys are into that too. Anyway, this is the state of our neck blank at this point. I'm going to set up a fence on my spindle sander, and you guys have seen me do this before, and there are other guys who use this method as well. I'm going to use my spindle sander as a drum sander, and we're going to get the thickness on the back of this neck. Since we've still got a nice flat surface on the front of here, that will give us a way to set up that spindle sander and get a completely parallel surface cut into the back of this neck right here. We'll do the same thing on the headstock and get it to within a millimeter or two of its final thickness. We'll pre-shape our volute and get it kind of preliminarily cut in. We'll do the same thing down here on the heel where it goes up into the body, although we will be hand shaping this once I get this neck glued into the body. So in the next video, we're going to get this neck to a point that I can use it to clamp to the top of my body blank, mark out a neck pocket, get that routed in. Before I glue this neck in, I want to get the neck pocket cut, and then we'll draw out a body shape on the fly on top of that body blank. You guys already know I'm using a Sophia 344 Tune-O-Matic style bridge on this guitar, so at least that's been decided already. That will help me when it comes to drawing out my body shape as far as scale length goes and control placements. It's a 2-humbucker guitar, it's gonna be, and that will help us decide where we want to place all these things. You guys come on back for the next video. I hope you guys like the content I'm putting out. If you do, please give a thought to hitting that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and please remember to comment down below and let me know what you'd like to see coming up here on the channel. I've got many guitars that I want to build on video, and I'm hoping you guys will keep on joining me for this ride that I'm on. Don't forget to check out everyone else's Great Guitar Build Off 2022 videos. There are some amazing instruments being built this year. If last year's any indication of what ends up happening, this should be really stellar. Throw some support to the Great Guitar Build Off and let them know you want to see more of this, because I'd really love it if this thing can continue on into the future. And I hope you'll join me back here for the next episode of my build for the Great Guitar Build Off 22, which is the build that I am calling Cloud 9. So until that time, you guys, peace and love.